Hi, it's Mayor Walter Sendzik, and I want to say thank you to joining for the next episode of Our Home with Mayor Sendzik here on Your TV Niagara. Spring has sprung finally. It has been a long 12 months. It has been a challenge for our community, and I got to tell you, when you start to see the first signs of spring, the little snowdrop flowers, the sun rising earlier and earlier in the morning and the sun going down later in the day, it just gives you that sense of renewed energy, renewed sense of optimism. And it's good to see people out and about on the trails and in the parks. You're exploring the rebirth of the season of spring, which is a wonderful time of year here in St. Catharines. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking with Jeff Lockyer, who is the lead pastor at Southridge Church here in St. Catharines. And then after the break, we have David coming on from REACH. It's an organization working with folks who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And so it's a great show. It's going to be an informative show, inspiring show, and also giving you insight into organizations that are helping those in our community navigate their way through what has been a challenging time in our community. So I just want to first welcome Jeff to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Great to be here.
I often see Jeff on the trails. He is a national team long distance runner when he was at University of Toronto.
Yeah.
And he's been also the chair of the board of the Global Leadership Network in Canada, which is an amazing organization we'll touch on. And for those of you who are into podcasting, those of you who find their inspiration on those who have gotten the mic and have released their thoughts into the internet universe, you can find Jeff hosting Finding Our Way. It's a weekly podcast that he does. And he also has a soon-to-be-released book, Finding Our Way, as well.
That's right.
So you're starting to get a sense of Jeff and what drives him, which is about helping people find their way through a very sometimes complicated life.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And I see Jeff every once in a while on the 12 Mile Creek, avid runner, much faster than me. And usually it's someone blowing by me, and I look and I see Jeff, and he just keeps going. We do have some awesome trails here.
We don't have much time to chat on them, though, do we?
Nope.
We say a quick wave as soon as we recognize each other.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Because if I stop, my leg sees it.
I can't stop either.
And so you're living in St. Catharines, which is awesome, with your wife, Becky, and you have 3 children, very active as well. And aside from coaching, I also know that you're taxiing your kids around town. And it's been a challenge over the past 12 months because a lot of that sporting side of kids' life has been put on hold.
Yeah, things became real simple, real fast. My daughter's a soccer player, and so only recently have they been able to resume any kind of training. My middle child son, Simon, has taken on golf to a whole new level, which is a great sport to get into during the pandemic. And my oldest is a runner, so he's been able to kind of keep rolling pretty much unaffected outside of competition. Right?
Is he faster than you?
Oh, he's light years faster than me, so we won't talk about that right now. Not supposed to ask those questions.
That's awesome. So you talk about family, and you talk about the impact of what our community has gone through over the last year and the connection to Southridge and church, faith.
Yeah.
So as a lead pastor, as a leader in our community, a faith leader, what have you seen as been challenges, and how have you helped people overcome those challenges as a pastor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the past year has really focused faith communities on probably 2 primary questions. The first would be how you actually understand what a church is. So, for a lot of us, when we associate people of faith, we would refer to them as church goers. So the church, kind of without maybe thinking about it, the church is a building or a place you go or a time of the week. It's kind of any event, often on Sundays, a certain time, Sunday mornings. And so in that mindset, when COVID hit, the only question was, well, how will that Sunday event, the word is pivot, right? How will that Sunday event convert into something else? And in our context, it converted to an online format like many other faith communities. But for us, our understanding of what the church is a community of faith-based people trying to live out these teachings in a way together that expresses, in our case, the love of Jesus to the world around us. So it's a much more active, every hour of the week kind of engagement of a way of life that we do together. And so in our context, I know you're familiar with all of our locations, which are defined way less by our service times and way more by what we call our anchor causes, kind of the core initiatives of compassion and justice that try to make a contribution to the well-being of the communities where our locations find themselves. Obviously in St. Catharines, we have the location on Glenridge Avenue and the Southridge Shelter, which is a part of our building there. And so each of these anchor causes kind of defines us, and each of them remained essential services during the pandemic. And so in that regard, there was no stop, there was no pause. In a sense, there was no pivot. We've had to run the shelter differently, obviously. We can talk about that as well. But really, it was all systems go. If not, it was a ramp up of the care and compassion that was required because people were finding themselves in more difficult circumstances, especially experiencing isolation. So there's this one view of church where essentially everything closed because all church was this event on Sundays. There's a church near where we live that I drive by, and it still has a sign outside that says, "All activities will be suspended until further notice." And I thought, yeah, I understand what they're saying, but it kind of gives the impression that through COVID, the church is closed.
Right.
Where for Southridge and for, I know, a number of churches in Niagara, the church actually stepped up and stepped into the challenge because the church isn't an event, it's a people and a way of life, and ultimately expressing care and compassion in a community. And so I think that's one of the things that faith communities have had to process is, whoa, what is it that we actually mean by this word church, or even beyond Christianity, what we mean by a faith community. The other thing I think has been specific to the pandemic, and that is how you approach or how you navigate the pandemic itself. I've kind of described it to our people as the letter of the law approach or the spirit of the law approach. And the letter of the law approach would say, given the restrictions and whatever phase or zone of the restrictions that we're in, what is the absolute most that we can still do? Right? What is the absolute most that we can still do? And, maybe even can we push or advocate to be able to do more, as faith communities, where for some of us, we've taken a different approach, what I would call the spirit of the law approach, where regardless of the parameters that have been set in place, the overarching message has been reduce your contact as much as possible. Right. Do as little as you can in order to prevent spread and protect the most vulnerable. And so our approach, maybe counterintuitively, hasn't been to do as much as we possibly can. It's been to say, regardless of what we're allowed to do, let's do as little as we possibly can in order to serve our surrounding community, because that's what we're trying to be about as a church, and try to protect the most vulnerable and prevent spread. And so, for much of the pandemic, outside of the last few months when we've been under lockdown, regardless of the provincial parameters, green and yellow and orange and red, faith communities have been able to gather, again, on Sundays or in their large group in-person gatherings at a 30% capacity. Well, in our context, in our St. Catharines location, it seats over 800 people. Right. So we could still have 240 people gather. And when we look at all the other parameters of group sizes and whatever, we think that's just outrageously, eccentric compared to the restrictions everywhere else. And so we've made a decision as a leadership and as a community to kind of live out that spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, and say, even though we could gather, even though 240 or so of us could assemble every weekend, we're not going to do that. And even though we probably want to, we're going to continue, with regards to Sundays, we're going to continue to gather online only as our contribution to the community, because everyone's trying to make sacrifices, especially to protect the most vulnerable. So,
and it's that alignment with the protection when you think about what you're teaching and how faith and the role of Jesus when it came to looking after the most vulnerable in society, and how he would wash the feet of the lepers, and it's an important thing that I think may have been somewhat, I don't want to say lost in previous years, but became more clear that we all have to look after one another, and the most vulnerable are times where we have to step up even more. So we're coming up on Easter, and this will be the second Easter potentially where we're in a situation where it's different. So how do you keep people's faith, and how do you magnify that faith without being able to have Christmas together, without being able to have Easter? And you look at the I'll call them the high holidays, but the holidays of spiritual renewal and community. How do they keep that faith?
First things first, there's no question that, at least from our perspective, anything online is an option B. Yeah. We're all zoomed out and binging on Netflix, and we're just staring at screens all day. And so celebrating Christmas online, celebrating Good Friday and Easter Sunday in our context online, I mean, that's an admitted option B, because the faith that we understand of following Jesus is all about incarnation. That's what Christmas celebrates, is the incarnation of Jesus, God coming to earth, and as followers of Jesus, we're to incarnate his life ourselves. And so where we've really tried to lean in has been in the other aspects of faith life, not just the large group gathering, which for us has been online, but the engaging of compassion and justice and care to those in need, and the inter-community connection. We have an infrastructure called life groups. Many churches do this, where they break up their congregation into bite-sized chunks, and we've really encouraged that, where groups have been able to meet outdoors, try to still meet in person, where they've been able to stay connected, via Zoom, where they've been able to meet each other's needs and support the, loneliness and isolation. That's been something that we've really leaned into hard to try to sustain us during this option B version, where we've had to live online for much of the pandemic.
And so in faith and the importance of it, I think you've shown so well, and your podcast, Finding the Way. So as we're heading into a break, just explain where people can find more of how you're guiding us through this. Talk a bit about your book and the podcast.
Yeah, the book was actually an early COVID exercise. I'd never purposed to write a book, but I wanted to engage in a little bit of the discipline of writing, just put frankly, so that by the end of June, in that first phase of COVID, I didn't only have Tiger King and Michael Jordan documentaries to show for it. Like, I had something productive to show for it. And so I started to write on a few topics that are relevant to our church, and it kind of flowed together and kind of wove together into a manuscript that now is in conversation with some publishers. So I'm hoping by the fall to be able to release that. The whole play on words of finding our way in our context is trying to live out the way of Jesus. So it's not just, lost people or confused people, figuring out their lives, but actually embracing this way of life, because that's what we understand faith to be, is much more of a way of life than this hour a week that you gather together. So, if people are interested, our website is southridgechurch.ca. You can check out our shelter specifically at southridgeshelter.ca. We've also got a social enterprise that activates homeless residents and former residents with job skill and life skill training to make jam, where our Vineland Anchor Cause farm owners supply the jam. And so we make artisan jam and we sell it, and the proceeds reinvest into homelessness. You can find that at southridgejam.com. You can find our podcast on all kinds of, Apple and Spotify and things like that. And hopefully you'll be able to find the book on a ministry that we're launching called The Leaders Village. So you can either find that on our Southridge website or eventually, hopefully, on leadersvillage.ca as well.
That's amazing. So, such an inspiration. And I got to say, as a member of our community, I've been inspired by your leadership, Jeff. You've given our community so much. You've given, beyond the Southridge community, you've brought their leadership style to the entire community of Niagara. And so I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for everything you're doing. Check out Southridge online, all the channels that Jeff just talked about. And the jam is a special favorite of mine. You will not be disappointed with the Southridge jam as well. So after the break, we have a discussion about how medicine and the medical profession is coming into the shelters to meet those who are experiencing homelessness in their place where they are, to provide much needed medical care. So you don't want to miss out on that. Just after the break. Hi, and welcome back to Our Home with Mayor Sendzik. We had Jeff Lockyer, the lead pastor at Southridge, talking about faith in the community and also some of the work that they're doing through the Southridge shelter. And now joining me is David van Velzen, who is the executive director for Reach Niagara. David has been in business for over 30 years. He has had a very successful career working with businesses, creating very well-designed marketing programs. He has been in senior management and has really been a success in business, and what he's really passionate about now is helping people in our community who are experiencing homelessness. So you're taking that business experience and applying it to an organization that is really on the cutting edge of helping people in our community. So David, I want to say thank you for joining me today. We've had many conversations about Reach Niagara.
We have.
And for those who may not know what Reach Niagara is, explain what it is and what your role is.
All right. Reach Niagara is, well, first of all, it was started by Dr. Carl Stobie and one of our directors, Fran Geeky. When Carl finished at McMaster, he and Fran had agreed that they were going to do something together. They just didn't know what they wanted to do. And 2017, they got together, had a cup of coffee, and they decided that they wanted to provide health care to marginalized communities. They wanted it to be impactful. They wanted to make sure it reached everybody that needed to find medical care that they couldn't get in a hospital or didn't have a doctor. And that's how it started. Then the first clinic they opened up, I believe, was at the Salvation Army Booth Center. Then Southridge, and then the Y was the third one, and in Welland it's now at the Hope Center. So it started with Carl, and then they have an MP, nurse practitioner from Niagara North Family Health working in the Salvation Army Booth Center, and it's just grown from there. And it's 3 years young, and they're doing a great job.
And the interesting thing, and why I've been fascinated with Reach Niagara and Dr. Stobie's work, is the approach that it took to working with those experiencing homelessness in our community. Because prior to 2017, and this is what I find interesting, is if you were experiencing homelessness and you had medical related issues, you had certain prescribed drugs that you were trying to manage whatever medical issue you may have, you pretty much would have to go to the emergency.
Yeah.
Or to a walk-in clinic,
yeah.
and
it's traumatic.
And it's traumatic.
If there's preconceived notions about homeless people, and so they go to the ER, and they're not treated poorly. It's a hurry up situation, right. And let's deal with it. Let's get them out, which is what ERs are trying to do.
Right.
And these people suffered trauma. Why are they homeless? How are they homeless?
Right.
And most of it's from a traumatic experience, mental health issues.
Right.
So the ER is a frightening place for them.
And that was the interesting thing that when I was talking to Dr. Stobie about this, it is that lack of access
yeah.
to a medical practitioner. And I use the word practitioner because when you look at the folks who are in the shelters, they don't have a doctor. No. That they, when someone says, "Who's your doctor?" They don't have a doctor.
They don't have OHIP cards either.
OHIP, they don't have And that's the interesting thing when we take 2 or 3 steps back from working with the shelters and those who are working with those who are experiencing homelessness, we don't realize that they don't have that network that we take for granted. The network of medical people that we know, they have our records. They know what we've been doing in terms of our health, all that stuff. And I call it stuff, but all that information is there's
sporadic.
It's sporadic.
Yeah.
And so the innovative approach that Reach Niagara has brought into this issue of homelessness is bringing the medical professionals to those people in their environment.
And we work exactly, and we work with TELUS Health, and we have our electronic medical record with them. So we can, all these people that we see, we have all that information now. So we can keep track of, prescriptions, tests, visits, and.
So what's some of the experience? So you've been involved with Reach Niagara for a number of years in terms of, since, it's only been around a couple of years, but you've been heavily involved. Explain some of the experiences that you've been aware of. What are people who are experiencing homelessness? What are some of the ailments that if you don't get to that, you can't get to the treatment of their mental concerns that they have? Talk about that.
Well, you have people with high blood pressure, diabetes, hypertension. There's mental illness, and to get, if we can provide these people with primary care, access to health care, tests, if they have to see, we have a social worker working with us now. If we want to elevate these people and get them housed, they have to have good health care, and they have to be healthy.
Right.
So and that's the goal, right? So people want to get out of, shelter, and they want to find their own home. Well, they need to be healthy, and we have to get them there.
Right. And I think that was the one of the learnings that I took away from listening to Dr. Stobie as well and his team is the underlying ailments of sometimes looking at the individual, and they may be on a number of different prescriptions, and then one is masking the other. And is creating actually more conflict within the person than actually doing better for the individual. And now with Reach Niagara, there's that record taking, like that TELUS program that you talked about. You're able to keep track. The doctors are able to keep track of the clients.
Correct, and the medication that they're taking. We have to take, we should probably take this person off this medication because it's factoring in the reaction to this medication, and streamline it all.
Yeah,
and that's one of the key things that they do.
So how is it funded?
Currently, we have a grant from the Fowler Foundation, which basically pays for the administration, and we work on donations, and we've had pharmacies work with us with respect to opening the clinics. They've donated the money so we can open the clinics, and we collaborate with family health teams, community health centers, and they supply people. They give us their RNs. They work with us in the clinics. And really what we're trying to do is bring all these people together for one common goal, which is to help this community and raise it up. Yeah. And you can't do that as a one-off, but what we're trying to do is we're a quarterback, and we're making all these different players, Niagara Homeless Services, public health, the family health teams, your work with us. Yeah. Once we're all going for a common goal, and we have to get there together.
And that's, I think, the important takeaway for people who are listening today is that this service has provided dignity to a person experiencing homelessness, a sense of safety, a sense of compassion, and someone in their corner.
Yeah,
you now have medical professionals in the corner of the individual that may have been largely alone for a long period of time. And that's a missing piece. When we talk about homelessness in St. Catharines and in Niagara, we have Built for Zero, which is coming on stream, which is its goal is to get to a functional zero on homelessness in our community. We're increasing the number of shelter beds. We're increasing the number of social housing programs and builds in our community. But it's also I'll call it the soft side of the infrastructure, and the soft side is that human side that your Reach Niagara is bringing to this complex issue. And in terms of the overall growth, your organization, how are you going to be able to continue to operate? What are you looking for that will give you that sense of stability? Because you said you can't do it one-off. Where does that sense of stability come from?
Well, we have to, because of COVID, we had a fundraising plan in place, and that all stopped. So we're trying to get donations off of our website, and we want to get back to our fundraising program. And because Reach is the new kid on the block, when the federal government downloaded money to community foundations, United Way and Red Cross, and they said, you can start applying. We weren't that successful because we were new, and we were, maybe to some unproven. And I think we've proven what we can do.
Oh yeah, you've proven it many times over. And I will say this: this is a season of Easter. It's a Ramadan is here as well. When we think of faith, when we think of our communities, it's also an opportunity for us to give to our communities. And so, if you have an opportunity, Reach Niagara, check them out on their website. You'll learn more about the programs, but you'll also see and find different ways that you can give to an organization that is actually on the front lines of helping those experiencing homelessness and giving them that sense of security when it comes to their health. And so I just want to say, David, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It has been a pleasure and an honor, the work that you're doing, the work that they're doing at Southridge with the shelter program there. We live in a very compassionate community, and we have to continue to remind ourselves what compassion looks like. And Reach Niagara is an embodiment of that kind of compassionate thinking. So until the next time, think about how you can help our community, how you can help those in your neighborhood, how you can lead a more compassionate life. It's who we are, it's in our DNA, and it's what makes St. Catharines an amazing community. So take care of yourself, have a wonderful Easter, and it's a great time to be in St. Catharines as spring has sprung. Take care.